Hey there, I'm Mark. Welcome into my studio. Today we're starting off straight away here at the build desk because we have an extruder to build. So if you've been following along on the channel for a little while, you might know that I've been thinking for a little while about replacing the stock Stealthburner tool head in my big Voron 2.4 printer, that one back there in the corner behind me. And I've been wanting to replace it with something smaller and lighter weight so that I can adjust the settings on that printer and make it print even faster than it does already. And I've been doing some research, and I'm pretty sure at this point that I've landed on the decision that I'm going to build another Dragonburner print head for that printer. We've built a Dragonburner here on the channel before, so I'm not going to show the entire process here in this video series, my V0 series, which I will link to that playlist up in the corner right now if you haven't seen that and you're interested. In that series, we built a Dragonburner as well and put it on that printer, and I've been super happy with how it's performed so far. But for this second version of the Dragonburner, I have some wrinkles and some new ideas and things that I want to try out. And so some of those are parts that I've ordered that are on the way. They haven't arrived yet. But in the meantime, while we wait for those to come in, I wanted to go ahead and get started on building the extruder that's going to go on the top of that Dragonburner print head. And rather than on the previous Dragonburner, what we did was I just bought an extruder. I bought an Orbiter 2.0. It's been great. I've been super happy with it. I would do that again. But in the interest of saving money and reusing some spare parts that I had around, I went looking in my spare parts bin and I found an old Galileo 2 extruder that was the Stealthburner version. So it was designed to fit in a Stealthburner. And I took that all apart because it's not currently being used, and I've extracted the parts out of it that I think that we need to go ahead and build a very small minimalistic extruder. It's called a WristWatch, and I'll link to this, the GitHub page for this project down in the description of this video, so you can go check it out if you're interested. But specifically, this is the Galileo 2 version of the WristWatch, which is designed to reuse all the parts, well, not all the parts, a good portion of the parts from a regular Galileo 2 extruder. So if you've bought a kit for a Galileo 2, or if you have an old one that you want to take apart and reuse like I'm doing here, there are only a few additional parts that you need to add to that to make this extruder. And so what we're going to do in this video today is I'll show you what we need, and we'll go ahead and put this together. We won't probably test it just yet because I need to put it on the Dragonburner, which won't be built. That'll be in future episodes of this kind of mini series that we're doing. So for today, it's just the extruder, and then we'll add it on and test it out in the future. But let's go ahead and get started, shall we? All right, so like I said, I've got here on the desk, I believe, everything that we need to build this wristwatch extruder. And kind of right here on the left-hand side are all the parts that I've pulled from the Galileo 2 kit, the original Galileo 2 extruder that I built. And then over here on the right are things that I've had to add in myself. So what we've got here are, the extruder motor, the gear housing, all of the 3 gears for the planetary gear system, a few bearings, the gear that actually grabs onto the filament here as well, and then just the thumb screw. So that all should have come with a Galileo 2 kit if you purchased one. Additionally, some heat set inserts would have come with that kit as well, but since I had built mine already, those heat set inserts for me are already inserted into plastic parts and melted in place, and so you can't reuse those. So I've grabbed a couple of additional M3 heat set inserts that we're going to need, and then 3 M3 screws. These are 35, 25, and 20 millimeters long, and so those are all you need as far as additional hardware that's not part of the basic Galileo 2 kit. And then there were a few parts to print. We've got these kind of 3 main housing, the 2 main housing parts and the little tension arm part, and then there is one additional part that goes on the front, just the knob to turn, and it actually comes in 2 different sizes. And so I went ahead and printed both because I'm not sure which size I'm going to like better, and once we get to the end of the build, we'll look at those 2 in conjunction with everything we've built so far and decide which one to use. I'm thinking probably the smaller one, but we'll see. Additionally, I noticed when I was looking through my spare parts, I have an extra grub screw that will work for this extruder gear, and these particular grub screws in the kit that I bought came with preloaded with some thread locker on them, and so I'm going to take the grub screw out of this one when we get to it and replace it with this one that has brand new thread locker, just to make sure that it gets nice and solidly locked in place when we tighten it down against the drive axle. And so with all of that, these should be all of the parts that we need to get started. I am going to, as usual, show you guys the instructions. This is, again, the PDF manual that you can download off of the Galileo 2 wristwatch GitHub repo. And so you can follow along as we go along here with the instructions. And it's written just similarly to standard Voron instructions, so they're really well done. We'll skip through some pages here that talk about how to print the parts. We've already done that. And then this page here actually shows us the configuration that we're going to need to change in Clipper under our extruder settings for the rotation distance and gear ratio and stuff like that. I will remember this, but I won't go and actually do it yet until we get this thing installed with the new print head into the printer. But that's good information to have for the future. Here's a list of the hardware that we need. And then finally, we can get into the first couple of steps, which are to install the heat set inserts into a couple of these parts. And so I have my soldering iron here ready to go. And we should be able just to press these right into place. This one's a little awkward because it's like on this part that's sitting at a strange angle. So I'm trying my best to make sure that it goes in perpendicular to the surface of the part. And they also show there on the instructions that it actually recesses kind of far down in there as well. Like it's just not flush with this top surface, it goes a bit further down in. So I want to make sure that I seat that properly all the way down to where they would like it to be. And that looks really close, but maybe just a touch more. All right, excellent. And then on the next page, we have the one other heat set insert, which is much simpler because it goes on into a part that we can just lay down flat on the desk here and push this straight down into place. All right, and that should be all that we need as far as the soldering iron goes. So, up next, they have some steps related to dealing with these planetary gears. I'll get you a closer up look here. So I've already put the bearings into the centers of these gears. And again, you know, this came out of a pre-built or pre-done installation, right? I had put these together once before. And so for the next couple of steps, we're gonna kind of skip around a couple of things, but we do need to put the gears onto the carrier here, like this. And then I believe it's on this next page. Yeah, they actually have you go ahead and insert this into this housing, and they suggest that you grab like an electric drill and, you know, put it onto this shaft and exercise it a bit, have it turn both ways just to loosen things up and to get any extra dust and debris from the manufacturing process of this gear housing and these gears out of there. Now, for me, since I've built this already before, this was like in a running extruder that actually ran for probably 6 months or so. So it's got a bunch of hours on it already. I'm not so concerned about that. Actually, when I took this thing apart, there was quite a bit of the lubrication that I had put into the gearbox, plus some additional little debris and stuff that had kind of come off of here over time from its initial use. That was all in here. So I had cleaned this out really, really well and cleaned these gears as well with isopropyl alcohol. So they're super clean now, and you know, this is moving perfectly fine. So I'm not concerned about following the instructions specifically here related to you know, exercising this gearbox, but I do want to lubricate it. And so I've got some of my PTFE lube here, and I'm just going to put the very smallest kind of pea-sized dot right in there, and maybe just get a toothpick here to help me get it down on the surface there of the gearbox. And then we're going to just run this by hand a little bit both ways to spread that around. Right, so I'm happy enough with that. So yeah, if you're reusing some Galileo 2 gearbox parts, this is probably all you need to do. If you're starting from a brand new clean kit, you're going to want to do a little bit more, you know, spin it quickly in both directions. Using a electric drill, as they suggest, is probably the best way to do that. And just make sure that it's all smooth and ready to go. But ours is looking good. So let's move ahead. And they want me to go ahead and put the little Bowden tube coupling here. Now this part here did have a version that you can print that doesn't have the insert for this, if you just want to feed the filament directly down into it. But since I have a Bowden tube inside my printer that I want to be able to attach into the top of this, I will do this. And I was a bit surprised that I was able to actually pry this out without damaging it out of the old Galileo 2, and that actually worked out okay. I was afraid I was going to have to buy a new one of those parts, just because it press fits in here so tightly. I wasn't sure it was going to be able to come out and be reused, but it was, so that's good. Trying to just make sure this is seated nice and flat and good. That seems excellent. Next page. All right, so they don't show the step here of putting the motor onto the back of this, but this goes right through here, unless I missed that step. I don't think I did. And in the original Galileo 2 instruction manual, they actually point out the fact that as you put these together, it's possible to get this gear just misaligned such that things kind of turn, but they don't really. They bind up. And so what they want you to do after you get that inserted there like that is just to make sure that this will turn all the way around and not bind up anywhere along the rotational path, right? Because you can be off by like half a tooth in one location and then this thing binds up and it doesn't work. But that's looking good. So with that motor in place there, and I got a little bit of the grease on my fingers, so I'm going to clean those off real quick. We should be good now to proceed with the instructions, right? Which are to grab one of our bigger sized bearings here, and this should press into this opening. That's actually a really good fit, so that's excellent. And then this should fit onto here. Right, now I want to orient the motor on the back here so that the wires that are coming out of it are down and to the left, rather than like if we turned it around 180 degrees, they'd be coming up this way. But I think this is going to be correct for being able to route this to the toolhead PCB that I'm going to have on the back of here. Now one thing about these wires, because again they came off of my other extruder that I had already built, I had already shortened these, and so this is quite short, but I'm hoping that it's long enough to reach to where we need it to go, because I don't want to have to splice things together. That would be pretty ugly. And as we put this on here as well, there are little cutouts in the printed part that fit into these two little grooves on the outside of the motor, and so that all lines up and looks really good. All right, and then they also point out on this picture that you want to, as you're aligning things as we go forward, I want to make sure that this shaft does move in and out just the tiniest bit. It's got some grease on it from my fingers, so let's fix that. They want you to make sure that it's pulled out this way as far as possible, just to get things lined up properly. So we'll keep that in mind. On the other side, the kind of the front side of the housing here, we put another one of these bearings into here. That press fits nicely into place. And then we put our extruder drive gear onto here. Now I did mention earlier that I want to switch out the little grub screw that's in here, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And just use this new one that has thread locker already applied. The other one did as well, but it would have worn off over time, right? So we'll go ahead and put that in there, get it started. And when I put this on here, the direction matters, right? They want me to put it with the tooth drive side in toward the back here of the motor housing. So we'll slide this in, just like so. And I'm going to go ahead and tighten this enough so that it grabs onto the flat side of this drive shaft, so it won't spin too much this way. But it's still plenty loose to be able to move back and forth, because we're going to need to center it above the filament path in a little while. But now with that in place, we can go ahead, I believe, on the next page, yes, and go ahead and put this on the front here. And all of that is basically the entire structure now of this extruder. It is extremely simple. which as I said, is kind of how I want it to be, right? I'm going to turn this by hand to get access to it right here for the purposes of being able to grab this thing. And we're going to use that to line this up. I guess before we do that, though, we should put these two screws in place. So they want the 25 to go here and the 35 to go up here. And these screw right through all of the plastic and into our motor back here on the back side. Alright, so I'm going to snug these down, not super tight, but tight enough to be sure that these two plastic parts are held together as tightly as possible. And the nice thing is on the back side here, these, let me get you a closer view, these two screws protrude a little bit from the sides of the motor where they come through there. So whatever standoffs we end up needing to put our tool head PCB mount on the back of this motor, they should fit in there just fine. So given that that is good, we're going to need to align our filament path now. And I think just to make this easier to turn, so this happens later on in the instructions, but they want us to decide which of these two knobs and press it in place. I think they actually do that right at the very end. But I think at this point we're probably good enough. We can do that now. And it'll make it easier for me to just be able to turn the drive shaft on the motor as we're lining things up. So I'm not going to push this all the way on, but I'm going to push it on enough that I have, that I can now grab this thing and turn it, right? So that way I can get this lined up here. And it looks like this is pretty close to already lined up, but what I'm going to want to do is just make sure that I get this lined up. And I've got a spare piece of filament that we can use to help out with this as well. So I'm going to run this down through where the filament comes into the system. And while I was shaking this thing around, this filament drive gear moved. So let me pull this back out, shift this over this way. There we go. And now we can drive this right down through the path here, and then we can make sure that this is lined up right in the center of the groove in that gear, and then just tighten this down. Nice and tight, because we don't want this moving. Alright, that looks pretty good to me. And if we turn this, even without anything pressing tension on this piece of filament from the other side, I can turn this by hand and I can see that it is moving through the system just a little bit. It's a bit difficult to turn this by hand, so I wonder if I don't have something lined up quite right here. Maybe let's loosen these just a touch and see what we can do here. Yeah, so that's moving well. So I wonder if one of my prints here is not perfectly level, like flat on the bottom, or if something else is binding up, or maybe I just didn't tighten this with the same amount of tension on both screws, and that might have a lot to, or that might impact a lot how things work, right? Because we want this drive shaft to be as perfectly straight as possible, the path where it lines up with the two bearings. So yeah, it does seem like this extruder, like be careful if you're building this, I would say. It seems like it's fairly sensitive to making sure that this is aligned perfectly in order for this to turn smoothly. And you might want to play with it a bit, as I'm doing here, and just make sure that your motion is really good and smooth in both directions. So I'm going to play with this a bit more. I'll probably speed up the footage until I get it to a point where I'm super happy with it and the filament path is lined up perfectly, and then we'll continue on from there. Alright, so after all that, I'm very happy with how this is lined up and how it's turning. If you were watching carefully in the sped up footage, you might have noticed I also switched out the knob here with from the smaller version to the larger one. While I think that I like the look of the smaller one better, it was actually hard to grab onto to turn this thing manually, and not that I'm going to need to be doing that too much once this thing is built and actually on the printer. I decided to just go ahead and use the larger one just because, at least for this assembly part of the process, it is making it a lot easier to sort of fine-tune and turn this thing by hand. So we're going to go with that. So now this is ready to go for the little tensioner arm, which I believe is our next step. They're reminding us again to have made sure, like while we were aligning this, to have this pulled all the way out this way, which I have done. So that's good. All right, so the tensioning arm here is very simple. It's just a bearing that slots into here. And I think then we just press this peg down through here into place. I'm not sure how far this goes in. Okay, so it's flush at this side when it's flush at this side, so the part was made to perfectly be the right depth here for that rod. And then that should be all there is to it. We just slot it in here and use our final screw, our M3x20, on this page of the instructions to go ahead and screw that into place. This goes into one of those heat set inserts that we put in back at the beginning, that's back here on this gray part in the back of the extruder. So I'm going to snug that down, but of course make sure that it's still loose enough that this moves very freely, and it does. And then I think this is the last page. Yes, the last page of the instructions is just to put our little tensioning thumb screw into place. This screws into our other heat set insert, and now we get to find out if I put that in perfectly perpendicular to the surface of the part. It looks like I did. It's going in nice and smoothly, and I'm not sure how much tension it's going to need, but there's a little bit still of motion there with that spring, so that's good. Oh, and then the last page of the instructions was to press this knob on the front, but I've already done that. So there we are. All right, and now we should be able to see again whether this looks like it's going to be able to grab filament. Oh yeah. I didn't even have to mess with the tensioning arm at all. So I can just turn this and we've got good motion of the filament both ways. It feels nice and solid. And again, we'll have to play with this tensioning amount once we get this in the printer and powered up and working. But yeah, this is looking really good. So this is the entirety of the wristwatch extruder. Very simple, right? It's basically just 3 printed parts plus this knob, and then the gearbox of the Galileo 2 extruder, that nice planetary gearbox, and the really good quality drive gear that's in here grabbing the filament as well. So it's, I think, in my opinion, taking all the best parts of the Galileo 2 extruder, the planetary gear system, and that extruder gear there, and putting them in a nice, very small, lightweight package. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see how this performs on the actual printer once we get the rest of the print head built. But this is looking really, really promising. It was super simple to put together, and yeah, it looks great. It's nice and minimalistic, just like I like. And so yeah, this will do it for this episode. Going forward, we are going to build, like I said, a dragon burner for this to go on the top of. I'm not going to show the entire build of that dragon burner, but I do have a few interesting parts for it coming that are different from the dragon burner that we built before for my other Voron printer. So those things I will definitely show. So this will be kind of a mini series here on the channel with this and maybe 1 or 2 additional episodes showing you the interesting parts of that dragon burner as I build that out over the next couple of days and weeks. And then we'll get this thing installed in the Voron 2.4 and reconfigure all its settings and everything to get it ready to print and take a look at how it performs. But for now, we've got this built, and that's all we can do for today until additional parts come in the mail that I've ordered for the rest of the print head. And so those will be coming up, like I said, in the next few days. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're interested in following along with that. And I will see you next time. Have a good one.